Welcome. My name is Jeff Merritt. I am the head of IoT, or Internet of Things, for the World Economic Forum, based in San Francisco as part of our Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution. It's a real pleasure to welcome you here for this session on building the cities of tomorrow. There's really no better place to hold a session like this than in China and in Shenzhen, that we're seeing such rapid change in China, and it's forcing us to really think differently about the pace and the speed of change and the ways that cities are developing. You know, prior to joining the World Economic Forum, I worked for the city of New York. I was their director of innovation, and we felt that we were in many ways building the city of the future, but when you come here to China, you get a whole different perspective, and you realize that there is no one city of the future. And when we were thinking about this event here and we were thinking about what sessions we wanted to hold, there was no question that cities would be front and center. We held a China Business Roundtable in July in Beijing, and we were focusing on the Internet of Things and cities. And one thing that was immediately clear is that many of the challenges that China faces are similar to challenges that have been faced around the world as we introduce technology into our cities. However, the way in which China and many of the newly developing cities are approaching this growth and this technological change is very different. And so today it is, I think, appropriate that we're having this session because there were two announcements. On one hand, the World Economic Forum released a new publication that you can get online on agile cities preparing for the fourth industrial revolution. And also we announced that in China we will be opening a center for the fourth industrial revolution. And not surprisingly, cities will be a key part of our work there. So I'm going to hand this over now to our moderator. John Artman is the editor-in-chief at technode.com. And we have a really exceptional group of panelists here. We're going to dig deep into this question of what does the city of tomorrow look like, and what can we do to build a city that is not only good for business and economic growth, but really is good for its residents and for quality of life. So, John.
Great. Well, thanks, Jeff. So with names and concepts ranging from digital city, intelligent city, ubiquitous city, learning city, human city, and smart community, the smart city as a concept has captured the attention and imagination of city planners, technologists, and economists around the world. Smart cities hold the potential to make denser population centers healthier, greener, safer, and overall just better places to live. In China, this is an extremely pressing problem. As of 2017, almost 60% of the country's population lived in cities. By 2025, it is estimated that 70% will reside in urban centers. By 2050, 80%. That's more than 1 billion people living in an urban area. As you can imagine, such high density exacerbates the already difficult task of making cities more livable. In Beijing alone, average total daily commute times are just under 1 hour, with some spending up to 6 hours every day, commuting from and to the outskirts of the city. And it's not just daily travel. From health to education, from waste to air and noise pollution, China is facing ever-increasing challenges created by urbanization. For China, smart cities aren't an option, and from top down, it shows. Since the concept's inclusion in the 12th Five-Year Plan in 2010 and their first pilot in 2012, China has gone on to create 500 pilot projects around the country, making up half of the global total and leading in the total number of pilots. China's President Xi Jinping said at the 19th Party Congress last year that smart cities were part of a deep integration of the internet, big data, and artificial intelligence with the real economy. So what do smart cities mean for China? What can China learn from other areas of the world? And how can China pave the way in scaling up smart city technologies for inclusive and sustainable growth? So these are some of the questions that we'll be trying to answer in this panel. And so we've broken it up into a few different sections. First, I'm going to ask the panelists for an introduction. And then I have some very specific questions for each of them. And then we're going to open it up to a bit more interaction between the panelists. And then once we're done with that, we'll open it up to the audience. So we'll start with Kitty. Just go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us what your ideal city of tomorrow looks like.
Sure. Well, thank you, John. My name is Cathy. I work for a company called International Data Corporation. It's a research company to research anything related to technologies. So I think to make it very basic, I think the city needs to be very safe. I want to live in a city that gives me a sense of safe and also like environmental protected, so I can breathe the air and everything. So that will be the ideal city for me.
Great. Tom?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tom from Berlin. My company is called Door to Door, a company I founded together with a friend 6 years ago. What we do is we help cities and regions to transform their mobility network, to optimize that. And when you hear a lot of disruption in mobility, we believe should rather be a transformative process. So we look a lot at the existing infrastructure, mass transit options, and we identify gaps in that system, and then we help the cities actually to enhance the system by implementing new services, on-demand services, micro-transit services, a bit like if a city would be able to operate a service like Uber but themselves. And if you ask me what role we expect from the cities in the future, we believe it should be and can be a much more active role, not so much looking at administration, but rather really looking at creating things, literally being more entrepreneurial. Because for once, they need to be more active because the challenges are going to be huge, as all of you know, with the growth of cities, with all the developments that come from that. But the good thing is they can also be more active and more entrepreneurial because the opportunities are not only technology, but I think an exchange like we have here on that occasion shows, allows for more and active roles of cities.
Great, great. Sun Zong.
Yeah. 各位好，我是
Good afternoon, I'm Nasir Chief. Today we're talking about urbanization and city of the tomorrow. I think the personnel, AI, and its emerging technologies, can we apply these new emerging technologies into practices from the macro picture? We need to perceive from the, we need to pay attention to many aspects. For example, for the protection of the privacy, this is the wish, a common wish. Therefore, we should provide good technology and leveraging this technology like AI, big data, and we need to approach from the small data then to the big data to let the general public to feel this kind of smart city. We keep talking about the smart city for over 1 decade. Now we are coming to the starting points, and we need to let the public feel this trend.
I'm the Chief Information Officer for JLL. We're a commercial real estate management organization, a global organization. It is said that about 127,000 individuals move into cities in Asia every day. For our business, this presents a challenge in terms of us supporting landlords as well as occupiers. And so we deal with this every day, a topic that's very, very close to us. One of our views around the ideal smart city would be a community that is quite well connected, but where the needs of the citizens of that community are prioritized at the highest level. So the quality of life in a city is of paramount importance. Sometimes it gets drowned a little bit in the talk and discussions about technology. So having the priorities right is where I think we feel the discussion should go, at least in the short term.
Great.
Okay, I'm Cathy Berx. I'm the governor of the province of Antwerp. Antwerp is a province of Belgium, situated more or less in the middle of Europe. We very often say that there are a huge amount of changes. I think we live in a change of era, and that has as a consequence a lot of anger, a lot of doubt, a lot of insecurity. So what are people very angry and upset with is the quality of life, the pollution, and also congestion. So I dream, and I think we should all work on a city where the hardware as well as the software are very well dealt with. That means very good quality of open space and of public space where people still can meet and greet and know each other. That also the architecture for IoT smart city will be applied in a way that is really good for people, and that really gives solutions for their issues and their challenges, and they have to co-create on as well the definition of the challenges as the solutions. Instead of that, that people can contribute in a positive way so that they have all the opportunities to develop their talents, their skills, and can contribute in a positive way and feel part of the city.
Great, great. So yeah, I mean, I think so what's so fascinating is that I think we've heard quite different answers from all of the panelists, but that's what's kind of interesting about smart cities is that there is such room to actually define what they are, and also depending on where you are, it's going to be slightly different. But first I want to focus on China. So Cathy, so how are China's cities responding to the massive increase in population growth, and how advanced, technologically speaking, are most cities in China these days?
Sure. I think, first of all, when we are looking at when your statistics showing that there's a billions of people moving to the urban city, it gives the city government a lot of stress. First of all, electricity. How can we make sure that there's enough electricity to actually support the industry over there for growth? Pollutions. So in a lot of the emerging city, what you can see is that the pollution is a major problem, and also like the transportation, so the traffic jams and everything. That's actually give a lot of stress to the city government. Now in China, what I do see in terms of the advantage is that the connectivity coverage in China, that is actually quite well connected. Like even in a remote city, you can easily get a reasonably good connectivity with your smartphone. So that actually make it easier so that you can collect the data, you can push back the information to the citizen. At the same time, if I look at the data, China is already, in terms of spending, China is actually already spending the largest market to spend on IoT infrastructure. So it started from many years ago to start with the smart meters, and then now with a lot of like IoT edge devices is installed in the city, so especially for surveillance and things like that. So I would think that it's actually gives the advantage for China to actually build the system to collect more data so that we have the opportunity to analyze the data to provide a more valuable information to the citizens.
Okay, great. So you're talking about spending just now. I mean, how do you think that's going to change, let's say, over the next 2 years or so?
Sure. I think at this moment, a lot of the smart city at the moment is really like to collect the data, to understand what is happening right now. With all the data, what we need to do then is like, how can we predict the future? So at this moment, we know that like, well, there's a traffic jam, there's a crimes, we know how to identify the people. But with more data, with more infrastructure, can we then predict the crime? Can we predict what is going to happen with the road, and or like we can predict about the weather so that we can actually prevent all the disaster, or like at least we know what to do from the government. So it's from what understanding of what's happening right now to like really to predict and then give everybody a better future. And it's also related to like a different priority as well, because different city will have a different priority they need to address. Some of the city may be more important to get the basic infrastructure. Some of them will be more about the pollution, so there's like a different objective they need to address as well.
Okay, great. And so Cathy, for the city of Antwerp, in the province of Antwerp, they're focusing mostly on IoT. Mm-hmm. So from a policy perspective, from a management perspective, why IoT first? Why are you focusing on that first?
It all started with a trip organized by VOCA Chamber of Commerce to San Francisco. We went to visit Cisco's of this world, so the big companies. And turning back, it was really a wake-up call to see, wow, we have to do a lot of more things to make and to find solutions to tackle with the real challenges. So we built it up step by step. Especially also we have the luck that the man responsible for Cisco, John Bakelmans, knew the city very well, came over back to Antwerp, and he actually brought together the right people, convinced, if there was still something to convince province and the city of Antwerp to work further on it. And so step by step with IMEC, which is the world leader company, and it's an inter-university center for micro electronics. And so they really made a good team, multidisciplinary team, to work on it, being convinced that is the only way to find the good solutions for the challenges that we are all facing. And they start with definition of what are those challenges. So we're making a community of now 20,000 people. They have lots of questions, can give a lot of input, and so step by step we are building it up. And so we felt that really the city is ready for it, and they just need the open infrastructure and the standard, so that also very young entrepreneurs with the data that are collected can make their own applications. They are checked whether they really fit with the open standard. When there are good user cases, they can adopt. So it's very interesting for small and young enterprises. Also Flanders invests a lot. European Union invests a lot. So that's how it all started. And now we have, that's an issue at the end, user cases, good user cases. And well, it's going well.
That's great. So for you guys see IoT as kind of like a foundational piece for the city of Antwerp.
Sorry?
You guys see IoT as like a foundational.
Yeah, it's a foundation, but the most important thing is that you have the good open standard and infrastructure so that everybody can just join. And I think it's the only way, because it's just an instrument. It's not the goal, it's an instrument to obtain defined goals. It's no air pollution. What is just also mentioned, make sure that you can predict an emergency so that the fire department knows when it's raining, how long it will rain, how much rain is falling, what is with the source, how it is the level of water in the source, so that they can know and they give a message to people, it might be an inundation in 2 hours, make sure, and there are sand sacks available, they can prioritize their actions. Same with safe crossing. We have we have quite a lot of people that die or got injured in traffic. Now the safe crossing is also a very important theme. So you use sensors, small sensors, because not that much. Make sure that all the behavior is censored, and that makes your traffic lights smart. They know how many cars, at how many minutes there will be a tram, how many bikes, how many pedestrians, whether it are pedestrians like older people, mothers with children, how many time they need, and they can organize on a good way, the best way to make the crossing safe and secure for everybody, and that makes that you do not have problems. And what they're also doing is that when you have to wait on a traffic light, a red light, that you have some kind of animation, a quiz or whatever, or interesting questions, so that they at least stop until it is green to cross the road, because also that's an issue in many cities. You think, okay, I can just cross the road, and they do not care anything about red light or green light. So there are things just to change the behavior with the help of IoT.
Interesting. It's good to know that that jaywalking isn't just a feature of China. So Sun Zong, so Cathy was just talking about creating an open platform for data so that people can actually access it. But what kinds of challenges, looking at the Inspur's iCity, what kind of challenges have you faced in terms of accessing and pulling together data from various government departments in China?
So you talk about data. Actually, we talk about transaction of data and data, sensor of data. We categorized into 3 aspects, and we also call it organized and internet-based data. From our experience, China's urbanization has reached 60% around, which means 60% people have moved to city. And we can see that in Tianjin, there are 15 million people, which impose a great pressure. What we are doing is to build a data center for city. It's a cloud-based data center integrating data related to the government. According to the statistic of big data, organized data accounts for 80%, internet data accounts for 20%. Not only China and the nation, its government is much data is related to the government. So Inspur has made a lot of work helping the government to build the big data center, integrating the data from different departments. Actually, what we are doing is to converge and share the data and open it to everyone. At present, we authorize the operation of the data. In the past, we talked about sharing government data and decentralized, and primarily talk about today one-stop connectivity, and this is the authority release and serve the public. Right now, we should make use of data to develop the industry. Currently, what we are doing is ahead of other countries. On 24th of China, Ministry of China has authorized Inspur to conduct the pilot of the big health of big data in China. So authorization by government is not it's not about data of opening to the public. Actually, it's authorized our company to make use of the data. With the data available, we can do a lot of work. We simply define our work into 3 phases. First phase is public service. Second is public facility service. And third part is industrial and commercialized integration. What the public calls about the one platform with 7 applications. Since panelists sit here today, we can see that government has a campaign to attract investment is a count of 7 connectivity and 1 flatness. Actually, it is 8 connectivity or 9 connectivity, which means that we can make use of the big data to make a mega connectivity. Traffic jam is the illness of the city. How we can make use of the big city. And the second, the one network to supervise and monitor the city. We talk about big data to recognize the face, to help us recognize the crime. Actually, the largest contributor is manual identification to pick up the crime. And we also connect data to hospital. People can see all the hospital outpatient records can be shared by different hospitals. And the third part is the government can help the public to run any errand with one time rather than run to the government repeatedly for one errand. And we can also make the operation into different grades. And sixth part is the one loan connectivity. Primarily mentioned repeatedly that it is difficult for SME loans. Why Ma Yun render loans to the SME very quick within 3 seconds? Why it cannot? Because by the large companies and the government. So right now what we need to do is just integrate data from the electricity, taxation, and the penalty, as well as the data from monitoring and credit online. And when you take the application and you can search for the information, you can get everything through. So this mega connectivity will enable people feel the advancement of the urban cities, and for delivery and online car hailing can also be integrated into the application. What I refer to 7 connectivities closely related to the government data. By the online car hailing, you can get taxi immediately. So the first phase, I think, is it makes me satisfied.
We were talking before a little bit about traffic, and I think that traffic, air pollution, noise pollution, these are probably some of the biggest pain points for most city residents. So do you think it's actually going to be possible to manage traffic congestion, and how close do you think we are actually to that?
Yes, I do think so. And I think what's very important to mention first, something that you already brought up also, is mobility is a very local topic. One of you can relate to that, and some of the mayors in the room may think, well, if the city of Tianjin tackles a problem in a certain way, how can I adapt that to the city of, or the region of Antwerp? Isn't that very different? And I think it's true. It's very local, it's very specific, the people behave very differently for various reasons. However, and that's the good news, the tools that you need to tackle those challenges can be applied in very different manners. It's like with a hammer and a nail, you know, they don't care about the wall. Whatever wall it is, whatever house it is, the hammer is there to put the nail in the wall, and the same it is with software solutions. They can easily be adapted to work in whatever kind of surrounding. In regards to the traffic jam, I think what we already see is that the inefficiency of the current state is so huge that if you look at the resources being used to bring people from A to B, they are used in such an inappropriate way because it just wasn't better. There was no chance to do it in a better way before the internet was invented. People had to take the car. People took public transportation, a very inconvenient, static service going from bus stop to bus stop. That is not so great, so I'd rather take my car. So now the internet kicks in, and we look at what data can provide in terms of insight, how inefficient the system in fact is. And there are several studies out there. We see it from our own data, and you just have to stand at any road. You see there's one single passenger in a car, so this is not efficient. But how inefficient it is, you can see from the data. And when you would do just a test to say, okay, how if I pool everyone who uses their own car in a dynamic minibus kind of service, let's say in a 6-seater or 8-seater bus, so those people share their ride, still go from A to B, embedded in the existing mass transit infrastructure, you can reduce up to 97% of all vehicles on the ground. 97%. That's not a number I make up. It's a number from the OECD, so some institution with a reputation. And although that is a simulation, that is a study, we see with our own data that if you make people use such services, you take literally cars off the street and you give space back to the city. So this is just one example where you can apply with the same infrastructure that you have, with less resources, the same experience for the users, having a convenient service to go from A to B, just not with their own car, but with a similar service in terms of convenience, but much cheaper, obviously, than taking a taxi. So I think it's really important that we look at it, how we can use the existing infrastructure in cities, not so much about replacing it by some new form or new vehicles. I mean, everybody knows the city of New York, most likely, 60,000 more vehicles on the street since all the ride-hailing services came into the game. This can be the trick, right? There must be something smarter. And I believe smarter it is to enhance the existing mass transit, to bring in also taxi companies, local taxi companies, to share their rides, to do ride pooling. So there you can strengthen the whole system and give the responsibility to the local actors. And then again, with the image of the hammer and the nail, the local specifics need to be applied by the local people, by the local institutions, by the local companies, not by some other company who has also some side interests, obviously. And maybe we can touch on that later also. It's really the question, how much do we want to privatize in terms of mobility, or how much responsibility still sticks with the city authorities and publicly owned companies, because they are then the ones naturally there to work on the policy goals of a sustainable mobility service.
Yeah. So I guess, but in terms of no matter how it plays out in terms of public or private, what that mixture is, one of the big challenges is data and data sharing, similar to what Mr. Sun was talking about. So how do you see that actually playing out in these types of scenarios?
I think it's very interesting to hear his perspective, and I think China is advanced, most likely. If I look at European cities, travel planning, city planning still looks a lot at 10 to 15 years to look ahead to. So a rather sustainable but also very inflexible way of applying some data. And what we then need to do, and I think it's starting, is to take much more of the data we already have. I mean, there's data available, and then apply it in a way that it constantly enhances the system. So I think it's really interesting to see, can we come to a point where the city mobility can respond to the actual needs of the users in a much more agile way. If you think of weather conditions, obviously, whether it rains or it does not rain, it makes a big difference how people go from A to B in a city. But the traditional transit system is not prepared for that. I mean, the bus goes every 20 minutes, whether the sun is shining or it's raining. It doesn't change. There's summer plan and winter plan, the most. So, and this is just one example of if we apply data in the right manner. First, historically, to say, okay, what did actually happen last year in summer times when there was a big football match in the city? What was the heartbeat of the mobility of the city? So learning from historic data and then start to make predictions so that we can already look ahead and say, okay, next Friday there's going to be a football match again. It's going to be rainy and there's a school break also. What does that mean for the city? And I think we can tell that. And then the system can prepare and adapt, and I find that fascinating because that is nothing we need to wait for actually when the autonomous vehicles kick in. You often see that with the autonomous fleets, all that will be possible. Yes. But even with a driver behind the steering wheel, you can have a much more flexible system. Nobody prevents us to tell these drivers where to go, depending on the actual state of the city. And that, again, will increase the attractiveness so much that people will forget about their own car. And I'm saying it as a German citizen, and we all love our cars and stuff, right? But if it is an attractive public transit, this is a trick to get people out of the car.
Interesting. Yeah, and so I mean, I think autonomous vehicles, it's you know, it's everyone's dream and everyone's vision, but we still have yet to see any real implementation. And so part of it's also going to be just small steps, incremental implementation. Yep. So George, so looking at financial sustainability of these technology projects, I mean, especially with the pace of technological change, it's always a bit of a concern. So what are some of the key tips or lessons from your work that could be applicable to China as it implements its 13th five-year plan to better enable smart cities?
Look, the technology landscape is rapidly changing. If we look at the platform that's required for a smart city framework, we talked about IoT being a foundational technology that's required. There's other pieces of technology that's wrapped around that, but the IoT platform is fundamental and key to an effective smart city. That drives off of a lot of hardware, and this hardware is largely a sensor framework. And sensor technology is rapidly changing. I mean, if you look at 18 months ago, the sizes of the sensors to what they are right now, to where they are implanted, if you will, all of that's changing. So the trick here is to sort of keep this technology framework fluid. And how you do that, we believe, is that you focus more on the ICT and you focus more on the converged data platform. And what that really means is that if you have a cloud-based platform that is agnostic to the hardware technology that you use, you can continuously change and adapt to what's new, right, without having to make a lot of changes to the data platform. And then all the downstream things that you drive off of it, which is the intelligence, the artificial intelligence we spoke about, the predictive nature of analytics driven from data, all of that becomes largely unchanged. We talked a bit ago about the principles of smart cities being roughly the same across the different cities, but there's variability in how we go about doing it, right? This solves for some of that variability as well. So it's important to keep the technology investments fluid and invest in middleware, if you will, so that you can actually plug and play. And the last bit I'll say about that is we live in a world where we're walking away from huge capital expenditures in technology. But we don't like the large on-premise implementations, right? We like to be in a cloud environment and purchase things as a service where you drive the operating expenses higher, but reduce your depreciation and capital expenditure, right? And that's the way to go as well, because the technology is changing so rapidly that if you actually set something up for the next 5 years, you're going to have a lot of sunk cost in that investment. There's really two things I'm saying. One is let the hardware evolve, invest in your middleware, and make sure you're in a as-a-service type model so that you don't really invest in capital.
That's interesting. So, but again, kind of going to the data question. I mean, so what do you think are some of the bigger opportunities if more cities were more open and more liberal with their data, especially when it comes to IoT and other smart city deployments?
It's a very interesting topic. Data is out there already. So if you start looking at the land registries around the world, right, several of them have started to put their data out there, and it's there. One of the interesting things about real estate is that while the core critical information is relatively standard, the transactional information is actually quite nuanced. So even if we decided to put it out there, for it to be consistently consumed, there's a little bit of work to do, right? Otherwise, there's going to be so much variability in that data. So the point I'm making is that it's going to take us about a year or two more to make sure that transactional information is consistently out there. right? Land registries, et cetera, have started to put information out there already. What we feel is starting to become a challenge is the relationship between the private sector, the public sector, and the citizen in this whole engagement, right? And what I mean by that is if you look at most of the data that's required to power decisions, if it's failure detection engines like what you spoke about, anomaly detection engines like you were giving the example of people walking across the street and things automatically happening. When you think about those types of engines, you are largely able to operate at aggregated data levels. And aggregated data levels doesn't really infringe upon people's privacy because, again, it's anonymized and it's aggregated. But when you start recognizing the individual through facial recognition, like the incident we had in Singapore like a year ago, where it sort of freaked out the citizens a little bit, where it was actually recognizing yourself, that's where you start getting into citizens feeling less comfortable about it, right? And so we wonder, we have this debate all the time amongst our industry peers about data contracts. Are we going to live in a world where there's going to be required a data contract between a citizen and the government so that you know what you're actually going to be sharing? And in the instance that you are not willing to share that, what are some of the alternative ways in which you can achieve the same objectives of a citizen so the smart city can move on, right? So sharing of data, I feel, is already happening. That's a lesser of a problem right now. I think it's more about the protocols and the governance around how do we make sure that we're being responsible through the whole process. And again, I go back to my opening statement, which is, to us, there's a lot of technology in the smart city space. It's really about prioritizing why we're doing this in the first place. And that, to us, is really about improving the quality of the citizens' life, everyday life, right? And when you come to that, then you start thinking about what does that data sharing mean to them, and then you go into the data contract type thought process.
Yeah, it's very interesting because I think that, again, I think a common theme that I'm hearing from all the panelists is really what we're talking about now is principles. Because if we look at every single city, I mean, even in China, they don't actually have like a set way of doing smart cities. Instead, each different city has kind of their own focus that they're focusing on. And so, of course, there's going to be different implementations. But also, looking at creating something that is more open. This is what I love about technology in general. That's why I love my job, is because it's very aspirational. We're looking at the future of the world, and of course, we're far from having autonomous vehicles everywhere. We're far from having flying cars. I remember when I was a kid, I was supposed to have a flying car in 2012, if I recall correctly. Obviously, that hasn't come about. But the fact that we're talking about this and that cities and governments are looking at this and the private sector is also getting very, very involved because there's a lot of opportunity there. For me as a reporter, but then also as a citizen, it's very, very, very exciting. But I wanted to kind of open the floor a little bit and talk more about, because I feel like this is kind of what the World Economic Forum is all about. It's about public-private partnerships and creating more dialogue around that. So Cathy, I wanted to kind of ask you first. I mean, so looking as a public servant, when you're looking at the private sector, like what do you want from them, or what do you wish they would do better?
First of all, we focus a lot on what we call quadruple helix, and quadruple helix means that you work in a multidisciplinary way together: government, private sector, people, and independent research centers. So also that you have universities, technological centers, and research centers. You need the knowledge of everybody, but also the people should be involved. If I mentioned co-creation, it's really co-creation. That also has to do with acceptability. People have to accept, they have to understand what it's all about. So that's the way to work. And as you just mentioned, the plug and play. So that means that they have the data, they can just look for good user cases based on the users and on people that are really admit that it's a good case. Then they can develop it. When it is approved by that independent multidisciplinary team, it can plug in, not to abolish or to make any damage to the architecture. You have to be very careful about that it remains open, and then step by step you can go further. And the next thing will be the scalability. That will be an issue because it's just a segment of the city of Antwerp for this moment. And then you have to see how you can do it on a lower cost, on a faster way. And for things you really need as well, we also work with public tendering. So if they don't do it by themselves, because they have a good user case and they see how they can finance it, the other things you have public tendering, which is an issue.
Okay. And so kind of going off of what Cathy was saying, so Kitty, I mean, looking at public-private partnerships, I mean, China is especially interesting because we have such large tech companies getting involved in a lot of these projects. I'm not sure, it feels like it's fairly unique that such large tech companies are becoming so involved. Alibaba is very involved with Hangzhou. Tencent, of course, is involved in Shenzhen, but they also have projects all around the country. So what are the roles, do you think, for tech giants like Tencent and Alibaba, and perhaps even looking at the rest of the world as well?
Well, I think before we talk about the technology company, one thing I do feel that it is different in China is actually the role of the government. The government actually identified a priority and objective very clearly, and in fact, they will work with the technology company and give them the focus. So if I look at, say, the Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent, for example, they do have their focus. Like, Alibaba is more focused on building up the smart city systems. And then Baidu is more focused on connected car. And then Tencent is more focused on healthcare. So the government in China is very clear and prioritize themselves. And then how to involve the technology company to build it together and then make it as a template and then roll it out nationally. So that's what I see is different and it's actually effective in a way because you involve it. The second thing is that like involvement with the private sector, because lately we do see that there's a lot of properties company. It's actually partner with the IT company and then build up software park or economic zone together. So one thing, what I see is the Chinese like smart city is facing is about the financing. So then they also build up the model is like who is going to run it. Okay, whoever spent the initial part of the money doesn't mean that they are the right people to run the system. So they also build up a business model so that at the end of the day, the private sector can actually benefit and then run it, like hoping for the longer term that they can actually get the investment back. So that's what I really see the difference in China and then how they roll it out, the plan.
Yeah, and so it seems like that kind of model in terms of where the investment comes from, who manages it, it seems like China's done that for a lot of different sectors. It's not just smart cities.
Oh, definitely. So because what we're really seeing is that I think the government also so clear about the digital economies. So they have been like standing out and say that data is like the future, and then we really need to build up the digital economy. So all of a sudden, everybody, regardless what sector, they're thinking like, how can I digitalize myself? What is digital transformation can bring me into? And then I think lately it's like, how can I increase my competitiveness? So how can I compete with all the data and technology? So I think it's also because of the objective and the voice is very clear, and all of a sudden everybody is really trying to build it together.
Yeah, that's great. So I still have a bunch of questions that I want to ask, but I want to make sure that the audience gets a chance to ask some questions before we do go. So was there anything from the audience, anything that you guys want to ask any of the panelists? Yes, right here.
Hello, I'm Sarah. I'm a global shaper from Vienna, which is actually the most livable city for 9 consecutive years. And I think it's super interesting what you said about IoT and collecting all the data, finding out who crosses the street to take care that there's not so much crime. But I wonder why we put a priority on this and not on adapting to climate change or fighting heat islands, working on vertical farming, taking care that there is high quality mass transportation. And I've not heard any of those words in the last 1 hour. And I wonder why we put a priority like this on very expensive data collection And I hope that you can tell me why you put the priority like this and convince me that this is the most impactful way to make the life better in a city.
Yeah, I only mentioned 2 use cases for the moment, but of course also the quality of air is a major important topic. You have like a similar use cases that really want to contribute to the air quality. The mention was on MaaS, the mobility as a service, to make sure that you have like good connectivity and that people just leave their car behind. We have also other kind of measurement, like LES is a low emission zone, so that certain kind of cars that are very polluted may not enter the city. So it's a combination of a huge amount of cases and of policy. But again, also on the air quality, what they do is renewables, and also the focus on real data and the real-time data on what is the air quality, what can be done, what if we take that kind of a measure, what will be the effect. So also air pollution, quality of air is of course an issue, but it's step by step. You have to really see also a combination of kinds of measurements and of kind of policy, but of course there's also a focus, and a very important focus. I'm sorry, I'm not emphasizing on that.
Swinzong, did you want to answer the question as well?
先刚才大家谈
Actually, what you talk is we have undertaken that effectively. You mentioned about air quality. We not only render public service, we also care about air quality. You have seen there have been many changes in China's air quality. And another issue is about improvement of water. Water pollution is quite severe in the past. Right now, we have hold one person accountable for one river. So along the coastal regions, we have the Gulf principle. We have specified the responsible person. In the meantime, we have we will make the pollution extent, make it hierarchical to sense. By sensor, we can test what level it is. For example, at this part of the pollution, it is level 2, and another part level 3. We can see which part is the pollution source. So the precision of sensor has been so wonderful and amazing. Public service has been so satisfied. We can see from government perspective, government has been doing all this work to see what is the largest source of pollution. From the satellite map, we can see, and they will directly localize, position this factory which makes the pollution. That is the source. That's why we have seen the great and rapid improvement of air quality. You can see quite clearly from the satellite map. You cannot shield the responsibility. Actually, it is tested, it is seen and sensed by the satellite. And for the management of the river pollution, we can see which pit has discharged the waste and the pollution. We use the IoT and new technology to solve the pollution. It is running very fast. We do not need to spend several dozens of years to see how many years have been used by the United States, Europe. Actually, government is quite potent. As long as government get involved, it will be solved very quickly. Laws and the stringent law enforcement have kept up with that. Whenever the pollution is detected, we will impose laws on that. That is very fast.
First of all, I love the passion. Thank you for that. Secondly, I want to second what Sarah was the name? What Sarah said, because I really want to encourage everyone who is in charge on city policy to be a bit bolder and to really throw out some visions there. I know that policy doesn't work that well if you do that, and then the voter is not so appreciative if you say, hey, there's going to be a big development in the city. They rather all love to keep the status quo. But I really believe that it's necessary to throw some agenda and some vision out there. Let's say you are being elected for 4, 6, 8 years. I would love to see then a clear statement, this is what I want to achieve, and then have goals out there who are really addressing the challenges in an appropriate manner and also reflect on the opportunities that you have if you adapt technology in the right manner. And to get cities, to get cars out of the city center, for example, that is not a dream that you need to wait 25 years for. And first cities start to do that. So imagine if a mayor says, I want to get the cars out of my city because I'm going to work on a transit system that is so capable, where you have from a bicycle up to an underground service, everything at hand in an accessible and affordable way, and I'm going to invest into that. I'm going to use the most modern technology to do that. And that is something, the boldness that is not natural sometimes in politics. And when we sit sometimes with mayors and city decision makers, we feel like evangelists, right? And then we show them the data and the capabilities. And then there's this kind of aha moment when they say, oh, wow, that is really possible. I could actually do that. And then we see that and I met a lot of people, a lot of mayors. Yesterday was a session on cities, you were there, which was very inspiring. So I would really love to see that spreading, because you're right to ask that question, and I think the people are right to demand it, actually, to say, hey, why don't you do something? Why don't you apply technology? Why don't you make decisions and get away from this incremental way how administrative politics used to work? Because we're living in much more dynamic times, so I would love the cities to adapt also in this kind of speed and scale.
Interesting.
I want to continue what he said. Speaking of government, the mayor of the government in China is frequently replaced. We may see different faces of mayor at different times. That's concerns about how private sector getting involved in smart city building. Actually, we have a CEO, superintendent of the smart city. How this is actually, we have the superintendent operator for smart city. We call it smart city operator because the mayor is uncertain. He is transferred from other position and is changed frequently. How we can keep the constant building of and operation of the cities, so the planning and building and operation, we must integrate together. When the public sector taking part in from the planning, it will help us financing, because smart city building, it requires large amount of capital. It's not the current resources can help that. We must turn to different sources of help. It should be helped by the private sector. We must adopt the way of PPP. That is effectively undertaken. We have made it successful for many cases, like in Jinan, in Loudi, in Zhangjiakou, in Zhangjiakou, where the Winter Olympics is going to be held. What we are investing or doing is the PPP. I will invest and they will pay the loans by different phases, and I will be the operator. So that is the private sector take part in, and the technology will be introduced. So I not only bring money, I will help you build and operate, plan, financing, building, and operation. With private sector take in the 4 parts.
One more question? Was there another question? Yeah, let's go right here. The microphone right there.
Hi, I'm Khalid. I'm from Morocco, and I work in smart cities, more specifically accident detection and medical response. So I wanted to ask, and it's very straightforward. So in Moroccan law, only public ambulances can actually intervene in case of an accident. And to get the government to enable us to interact with the public, ambulance system has been a great challenge for the last 2 years. In your experience, from a government perspective, from a company perspective that dealt with government, what are your best recommendations on how to not get in touch, but actually push on either policy change or just basic, access to those kind of services, knowing that we are setting up everything, we've done it in other countries that were willing, specifically with countries that have more laxing in matters of private sector intervening as well. But in case of governments, we are actually blocking. So I want to have your opinion on how can we actually change that. Thank you.
Great. Cathy?
Yeah, we have new legislation on it in the sense that the government, of course, puts standards on the quality of what kind of doctor, physician has to be there in a certain amount of time. So they just put in 12 minutes, there should be this kind of ambulance on the spot where there is an injury or where there is a problem. Then it can be public or private, but the price is also fixed. So you just put the goal, the standard, what they have to obtain. How it's further organized, that's for free, but you have to obtain the goal, and then you get only the price which is known from advance. It's about 60 euro at most, and it is independent whether it's in a city or in a rural area. You have to be very aware of the fact that it's not because you live in a city or that you live outside a city that you pay more or less. So it's quite straight and quite easy to organize if you're open for it.
Actually, I would like to approach from several aspects. One is organization, and that is for the contingency accidents. There's emerging technology using the AI for organizing resources. For example, the explosion of the vase in the mines, it couldn't be happen suddenly. You need to gather all this information in advance. How could you sense, for example, in Shanxi province, it's a big producer of the coal. I was visiting Jiaomei, a coal company. They were producing a very special charcoal. So all these sensed data, the testing identifying the water, the leakage. They didn't establish in the model. Maybe veteran or experienced miner, they knew that it's going to explode. But for the greenhouse, they have no ideas there is going to be explosion. So I think AI or the artificial intelligence is going to help us, empower us to capture this data. For example, for the kind of landslide, it won't be happening suddenly. There are many symptoms to be identified, so we can leverage this kind of collapse of the bridge. We need to consolidate the foundation of the bridge. China exploring, fathoming its way by relying on the big data to do analysis so as to predict kind of safely production which are closely relevant to people's production, people's daily life, so as to better protect people's priority under the life. So it can be divided into different categories to do this protection. It's my personal experience, my feeling. It's also my job. For example, in this mining area, we need to detect the leakage of and also for detecting the symptoms like a collapsing bridge.
But as a way to wrap it up, I want to ask each of you, maybe about 30 seconds, a minute or so, what's your biggest takeaway? What's the most surprising, or what's the thing that you'll take away from this panel today? Start with Kitty.
I think with all the panelists, this is a great discussion. The key thing I really see is two things. One is the priority, what we really want to address in different stage, and also the platform, how we can really share the necessary data so that we can really get a better prediction in the future.
Great. Tom?
I take away from today's session, as much as from the whole thing, the whole event, that I think these times are perfectly designed to have public-private partnerships in place, because the public needs to make up their mind on how do we want to have things work, and then private companies can be those pushers and developers and actually deliverables to make that happen. And I think this can be, if it's made in the right manner, a very fruitful thing. And I believe this is really the only thing to do, because if it's either way, public only or private only, it won't go well. So it needs to be both.
Interesting, yeah.
我通过今天我们这个交流。
Through today's discussion panel, I think everyone, each individual can provide all these widely accessible service. We can effectively tackle the privacy issue.
To me, it's been great. It's been really about understanding how far we've come with respect to this practice, right? The whole practice of smart cities. But it's also about how much more we've got to go. I think I recognize very clearly the variability in the operating model, if you will, of smart cities across different cities in China, outside of China. We had a good question about prioritization, where that sits in the whole framework. So it's a lot more to go, but tremendous progress. Every time I am in one of these panels, I just learn how much more advanced we've become in different parts of the world. And my ask really would be, what a great platform, World Economic Forum, to actually bring this together and apply some level of standardization without slowing anybody down to the whole process, right? And that would be, what you guys are picking up and doing is fantastic. So thank you.
Well, I think the most important is the ambition. So really be clear about the ambition and do not confuse instrument and aim and goal. So the ambition should be clear. IoT and everything is just a good instrument to obtain that goal, but that has to be clear. And you also have always to take care about what is the effect on the human being. That's the issue, that's the essence. What's it in it for the people itself, how they can improve their lives. And the instrument is an instrument, but the goal is the most important.
Yeah, that's great. And for me, I think that one of the biggest things, it's a reminder really of, I think someone mentioned this before, of how fast the world is changing, but also the fact that we need to change, start changing with it. And the problem, of course, is that governments, even large companies, are traditionally very slow. And what we really need to start doing is looking at how we can adapt technologies, methodologies, to really start pushing things forward and adapting and making everyone's life better. But with that, that's the end of the Smart City panel. Thank you so much for coming, and thank you so much to the panelists.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.